Hi everyone, we are live. Sorry for the delay. YouTube kind of crashed on us, but we are live. I'm Colombe and this is Andrea, and we are the hosts of How to Build a Country.
We are very excited about today.
And we have a very, very cool week ahead of us. We're going to talk about revolutions, why they matter, why people are scared of them. And we're going to look at a few historical examples. I really want to focus on women's rights revolution and the anti-apartheid movement. We're going to look at today's peaceful revolutions, such as the sunflower movement. And finally, we'll look at why it matters. But before jumping into it, let us explain who we are and why we're doing this. Andrea, do you want to introduce us?
Absolutely. So we are Atlas. We are the global movement. So Colombe and I are the co-founder of Atlas. My name is Andrea. She's Colombe. And we are the co-founder of a global movement, Atlas. What's it called? We're the co-founder of the global movement, Atlas, that has started 2 years ago to work on many different fronts to basically unite people and make sure that in the near future, as soon as we can, humankind is going to work as one to tackle the big challenges of today, from democracy, from the original democracy to climate change, to much more. So this is the work we're doing. And in the last few weeks, we started to tackling the biggest piece of work I think we have ever imagined to tackle. There's the idea of creating a global democracy, a global place for people of all walks of life and thought and characteristic to come together and actually start cooperating for a democratic future. So think about it as a global country, as a global institution, something along those lines. So this is the dream that we have. And we have a very ambitious program in front of us. We're going to run consultations across the planet in 2023 to ask the citizens of the planet, how would such a global country or global institution look like? How it should look like? And to make sure that many people are involved in this process, understand why we're doing this, and contribute to this from any point of view, we have launched this work. So we do lives from Monday to Wednesday, and then a show every week on YouTube and Twitch. And this piece of work, we call it How to Build a Country. And it's basically a deep dive in many important topics that we need to consider in our work to create a global institution or a global country or a global place for people to come together.
Exactly. And so if you look at the past streams, and what we've been talking about the first week was how countries are created. Mm-hmm. So we looked at, for example, when borders were erected, which is really recent, how money was created and so on, the problem with it and what we need to change. We then look at today's existing supranational organizations. So we look at the African Union, the Organization of American States. We looked at the United Nations, and we looked at the successes because, yes, they have some successes, as well as all of their many failures and what needs to change. And then last week, we also focused on other topics.
Last week, what did we talk about?
I have a big blank.
Yeah, I remember the big issues of today's global
order. Yes, yeah. Exactly. So we looked at fiscal justice and space exploration as examples of what is wrong with today's global order and what we need to change. And this week, we're talking about revolutions and how they take place. So the reason for which we're talking about this is in order to be able to create a democratic system of governance, we need revolutions to create change, new institutions, and as a result, governance. Revolutions are fundamental for this, right? So we need it to happen.
Yeah.
So we have 3 really cool topics, I think, ahead of us because we do lives Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and then Thursday we produce a longer show that we post on YouTube. And so today we're going to talk about today's revolution. So we're going to talk a bit about the concept of revolution and why it scares people, but then we're also going to be talking about China and Iran. Tomorrow we'll focus on historical revolutions. So we look at how they start in a more scientific manner. Basically, we'll try to examine how they start, what they often lead to, and what we can learn from them. And then on Wednesday, probably my favorite topic, we'll look at the case of Taiwan, because it's a recent, we'll look at actually the sunflower movement, which is a type of revolution. It led to institutional and social change.
A very positive revolution as well.
Exactly. And so we'll focus on the case of Taiwan and on the sunflower movement. But today, let's start with the beginning. What's a revolution? So, Andrea, if I ask you what's a revolution, what would you say?
So for me, a revolution is a moment of disruption. Is where things change for the good or for the bad, and it's, I think, also a natural status of many things in life, in nature, and obviously human societies. Revolutions happen because all systems are outdated and it must be changed, and there is resistance, and someone or something take charge and led to a disruptive change.
Okay, there's a lot. Let's unpack it. So, revolutions, there's been a study of revolutions from the times of Aristotle and Plato, and we'll actually look at the historical understanding of revolutions tomorrow. I think what you're talking about is basically there's some tension in society that leads to change somehow. So if you go on Wikipedia, there's a few different types of revolutions. There's sudden, radical, or complete change. That is a revolution. There's also a fundamental change in political organization, which often leads to the overthrow of a government, for another one. It's also understood a revolution to be an activity or movement designed to effect fundamental change in the socio-economic situation. And then also it's a change in the way of thinking or visualizing something, or a changeover in use or preference, especially in technology.
Okay.
So there's a lot here, and I think all of them are very important because they're all interlinked, right? Like the technological revolution actually enabled social and political change to a great extent in many places, and that's two different understandings of revolution.
That's very true. I mean, legislative change might lead to revolution. There are a lot of triggers that can basically start a revolution.
Exactly. And give me cases of revolutions that you've heard about recently.
I mean, there are the two that we're going to cover today. So we're going to discuss about Iran, and China, but there are many more. I mean, I think Black Lives Matter counts as a revolution. I think that even the attack on the Capitol might count as a small attempt to revolution. I think Hong Kong, it was another
But so
attempt.
do you think that any unrest is a revolution?
I think any unrest has the potential to become a revolution. I think probably revolutions are, they actually unrest that turn into something more than just unrest. So perhaps the Tunisian one is a revolution, the one that started a few years back and led to a completely democratization of Tunisia, even if now it's already rolling back. So I think that is definitely a recent revolution that we've witnessed.
Okay. Before we get into the example of China and Iran, which we want to talk about quite a bit today, I want to talk about why revolution makes people uncomfortable. So we often say at Atlas that it's time for a revolution in the way the world works. I believe we need an urgent revolution to change the way we govern, the way we behave in society, to change capitalism as we know it for something better somehow. I mean, there's many revolutions that are needed. And whenever I say that, people are kind of like, no.
It's too much.
It's one, they understand it necessarily as linked to violence, which it sometimes is, and sometimes there's a good justification for it. And sometimes it's not, but then they're like, oh no, we prefer other solutions. What do you think that is?
I think that the people that always react this way are people that have something to lose from evolution, and never those that are suffering. I cannot, for example, when we were talking about the example of revolution, I was thinking also female empowerment in a way is a revolution, right? It's a big one. And those that are very uncomfortable with it are men mostly, because they're going to lose the privilege that they have. And I think this example is very clear to everyone, and it applies to many other things. There are people that are very scared about violent protests against capitalism, against big polluters, against the economic system. And they normally say, like, I don't understand these people. Normally, people saying that belong to a category of people that are either very wealthy or they have conservative views for different reasons. So they like the status quo. Conservative means also being basically very comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah, I think those are the ones that beneficiate from the power structures that oppress others.
Exactly.
And systematically, I know that every time I mentioned this, when I was a kid, I was met from adults with, no, it's wrong. There's other ways to reach consensus and so on and so forth. And I remember having this discussion with an older man 6 months ago about the fact that we need, for example, another revolution, because when you consider the state of the world today, it's unacceptable. And he was telling me, no, a revolution is too much. It's too much. We need to go slowly. And I was like, if you consider the state of the world today, where a woman, I think the UN actually just put out data this weekend, it's 5 women and girls get killed by someone in the family every single hour. So as women, our biggest threats are family.
Crazy.
And when you consider the fact that inequalities are widening across the world, when you consider the crisis of the cost of living that is going to have huge impacts in many countries on the youth that is already having less access to job opportunities, fair salaries, housing, because a few have bought everything and so on. When you consider the fact that in our lifetime we will all suffer from the climate crisis, etc., nothing short of a revolution is acceptable. Anything less than a revolution is unacceptable. It is fundamentally unacceptable. We need sudden, radical, complete change. And I'm using those 3 words, sudden, radical, complete, because this is the definition of a revolution. It is exactly what we need.
Yes.
And I think, just to conclude on this, because today we're going to take 2 cases that most of our viewers will agree with.
Exactly. Easy ones.
Yeah. Tomorrow I want to go at less easy ones. I want to look at freedom fighters that were considered terrorists at the time, and whether, it's justified, it's not justified, and so on. And it will make people more uncomfortable. But I think it's important to remember that people who say, no, this is not an important topic, or there's other solutions are possible, we don't need such radical change, and so on, are people that don't suffer because of a particular topic.
Or also, I think that many times when we discuss about revolution, like I think about myself, I'm actually in the part that is losing power. But I think that it's basically understanding that you're not the center of the planet. And so you shouldn't be uncomfortable with other people actually trying to claim their rights, finally.
Yeah, and also you should be open-minded enough to understand that, you might be losing power is a big word. Huh? It's more that the people around you will not be risking their lives just because of their existence. Women will be killed less, or that, it might actually be positive for society as a whole if women have a better access to the job market, to education, and so on. It's not just that, of course, you have less men in positions of power, which it should be the case. We deserve to rule the world for much longer now after all of these years of not having access to power structures and so on. But it's also like, it is, we see that when women have power, societies do better as a whole.
It's very interesting that you start speaking about gender, because I did not mention gender.
No, I know. I'm speaking about gender.
But it could also be like economic opportunities.
Yeah,
right?
completely.
Like, as to Europeans living in London, we had a lot of economic opportunities that other people didn't have. And if at a certain point there is a revolution, like a communist revolution, we wouldn't be definitely on the right side of history.
Mm-hmm.
But it's understanding that if this happens, there's a reason why it happens. And obviously you can hope that it's not gonna completely devastate your life, but the truth is, unless you find a fix, this will happen.
Yeah.
And it's the right thing to do from an historical perspective. There is no reason why people in London are eating and having fun, and there are people on the other side of the planet that are actually suffering a lot.
Exactly. But now let's move on to another topic.
Let's do it.
So if you open the news today, it's very hard to see anything else than China and Iran. Well, actually, sorry, I'm really tired. Actually, Iran lost a bit of a news coverage, but let's start with China and then we'll move on to Iran.
Yeah.
And that's because a type of revolution is unfolding today in China, and I think we shouldn't underestimate it. To give you the gist of it, protests are taking place against the government across China, and this is huge because China, just to recap for those not aware, is an authoritarian country. It's basically a dictatorship where every single freedom is curtailed upon. The right to protest, the freedom of association, the freedom of expressions, and so on are completely curtailed upon. For doing so, for saying democracy, you risk life in prison. Yeah. And not only do they do so in mainland China, but they also occupy in Tibet, imposing similar draconian measures. They crack down on freedoms and democracies and rights in Hong Kong, and they're committing genocide in Xinjiang and threatening Taiwan. So it's not just China, they're looking outside as well to impose the same types of draconian measures. And because of the system that is not only very scary because you risk life in prison for saying democracy, but also because they have a high-tech surveillance system, it's extremely dangerous to protest. So what is happening in China is extremely relevant. It gives me an insane amount of hope. And you see the bravery of people. So let me explain. I did a bit of research today.
Go for it.
So right now, the government is facing a wave of public unrest that has not been seen in recent years. And basically, the protest started against the zero COVID policy. So China, since the beginning of the pandemic, has had an approach which is we want 0 cases of COVID-19. And so there's been really regular, unwanted, unpredictable lockdowns where hundreds of millions of people were locked inside their homes, were not allowed to go out. And it's not like a lockdown where you can go for a walk with a mask. It's really draconian lockdowns. And then there was a deadly fire, I think it was on Saturday, I'm going to mispronounce it, but it's called Urumqi. It's in the Xinjiang province, and that accelerated anger. And that's because people were locked inside their homes when the fire was happening because of COVID lockdowns. The fire killed at least 10 people, and it led to accusations that COVID lockdown was a factor. Just so you know, many of Urumqi's 4 million residents have been under some of the country's longer lockdowns. Some of them have been barred from leaving their homes for as long as 100 days.
Christ.
So you had this fire that already you had waves of protests, which is very rare for China because of COVID lockdowns. And you had this fire. And suddenly in cities across China, you have thousands of people that are gathering in open defiance to the authority. There's one survey that found that there's been signs of protest or mourning in at least 79 universities in 15 different provinces. This is huge. And the COVID lockdown aspect is fundamental because the protest started as a result of COVID lockdowns, but I think COVID lockdowns also show the government's mindset very well. It's a completely totalitarian approach that negates anyone's basic rights, locking people in fires and so on for more than 100 days. And now, and I'm almost done, and then I know you've also done research on why they have a zero COVID policy, which is interesting. But those anti-COVID lockdown protests are changing as well in something more broad, with protesters calling for freedom more broadly. So you have some protests where you have open calls for democracy, respect of human rights, and actually calling specifically on Xi Jinping, who's the president/dictator, to resign. So, for example, at Tsinghua, I'm mispronouncing it for sure, University, which is the alma mater of Xi, crowds were chanting democracy and rule of law. Other slogans included, we don't want a dictatorship, we want democracy, and yes to freedom. This is huge because people perfectly know that by doing this, they risk being imprisoned for many, many, many years. It's been done over and over again. And protests kept on happening. It's worth mentioning that today there were no signs of protests in Beijing or Shanghai, but there was a lot of police in areas where the demonstration took place. Also worth mentioning that, for example, a BBC journalist covering the protests in Shanghai was beaten by the police, detained. And the police have been asking people for their phones to check if they had virtual private networks and the Telegram app, because a lot of protests were coordinated on this and it's illegal to have it. So there's a lot. And to give you a bit of to anchor it, so I mentioned the COVID-19 lockdowns, but to anchor it a bit, this comes after years of crackdown by the CCP, which is the Chinese Communist Party. It's the one-party system, it's the rulers. And it comes after years of crackdown in China on rights, protests, and so on. Again, in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and other places, right? China has basically been trying to curtail any freedom of association, expression, and so on. But it also comes after Xi secured a third term in power, which is basically, until now, it's not like it was a democracy. Until now, it was a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime, but it was the elite sharing power, whatever. And right now, it's clear that it's back to a one-man type of rule. And something that I wanted to mention as well is, because right now you have a lot of students protesting, and the last time, or one of the last times you had mass student protests across China was something called the Tiananmen Square massacre. So Tiananmen Square and the remembrance of the massacre, and I'll get to what it is in just a second, is something that is forbidden to say basically in China. Like, you don't learn about it in school. You don't learn about it in history.
Yeah.
And some of our friends that are Chinese and grew up in China never heard about the Tiananmen Square until they left China, right?
Yeah.
And basically, this was in 1989. It was a wave of protests on Tiananmen Square, which is a place, student-led protests, peaceful protests for more opening, for more democracy, and so on and so forth. And it was met with tanks that massacred, and the numbers go from hundreds of protesters to several thousand protesters, with many, many wounded. And that was kind of one of the last times we saw mass student protests.
Is it my turn?
I mean, do you want to comment?
First of all, wow. Like, it's super, super impressive to see this protest. First of all, I'm incredibly happy. I know that, we will see what happens, but it's always so inspiring to see people in China standing up for it. People in any dictatorship standing up for their rights. I mean, we live in a democracy, and protests are not easy. Like, we protest in London, many other people protest across the planet. Even in democracy, you can be met with like violence from the police, stigma, consequences, so on. Doing so in a dictatorship is incredible. It means that you're really putting yourself, your life on the line, and they want also the people that you love, because often dictators do that. They actually go beyond just the person to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So that's, first of all, my impression. Yep. Second, thank you so much for the explanation. I didn't know a lot of these facts, and I think that, again, even more, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this protest will go beyond just universities and just the current outpour of anger. And I wanted just to share, on top of what you said, 2 or 3 facts that I read this morning as well, actually out of pure interest of why this is happening. Because people did not wake up now knowing that there is a dictatorship, right? That China is clearly not democratic since a very, very long time. Maybe it's never been, actually.
You mean why the protests are happening?
Why the protests are happening today. And obviously the COVID lockdown is a big reason. And so I went to see why is actually so committed to this COVID lockdown. Because, like, if it's so unpopular, they're not getting much from this approach. Like, the economy is crumbling and people are very unhappy and now protesting.
Yeah, by crumbling, we mean there's still like 3.9% increase in GDP growth, but for China, it's less than expected, and it's a blow to the Chinese Communist Party.
Exactly. And actually,
I'm just saying this because it's much more than our countries.
No, it's just that China normally would do way better. And I actually read that youth unemployment is up to 20% right now, which is a lot for China. Like, it's always been lower. So many indicators that things are not going well. So why are they so committed to that? And it's because basically China followed a very nationalistic approach to COVID-19 management. And so they did not import vaccines. So the approach from the beginning was always the one of like locking down, closing very harshly, and basically destroying the virus. But obviously, there's something that, also Western democracy did that in some form at the beginning, but then with vaccine rollout and different way to deal with the vaccine, we stopped doing. But in China, this kept on going because, as I said before, they did not import vaccines. So they only use local developed vaccines. They are suboptimal. They're just less effective. Hence, COVID is way more disruptive for them. But instead of importing vaccine, they decided to keep on going with this line, which is incredibly short-sighted. You see people are suffering. Like, after 3 years, you cannot continue imposing lockdown, even in the harshest dictatorship. In addition, something that other commentators say, that this is a clear indication of the shortcomings of dictatorships. Because democracies might start slowly, they might look around for best practice, they might even copy dictatorship for certain things at the beginning. But then the democracies auto-correct themselves. So, lockdown were phased out because we understood that we prefer to have, a certain amount of people probably with some level of sickness, that entire generation destroyed by months and months inside. So it just, trade off, and democracies decide and move forward and innovate. For dictators, this doesn't happen because public see as a small circle of advisors. They all probably say yes to him. They're all exactly like him, and they don't change their mind. They do not get feedback from outside.
I also think that there were a few things, which is Xi wanted to protect China's reputation after countries accused COVID to come from China, and then decided that he would prove that China is better than the rest of the world, so not actually buying vaccines that have high level of success. And so now he's fucked. But it's also, just a pure nationalistic perspective, which is everything that's wrong with the world.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all together, all the shortcomings together. And so I think basically these factors are pushing China to the brink of hopefully of a revolution.
I mean, this is the beginning of a revolution. Honestly, that's why I chose this example. Like, what is happening in China is mind blowing. People are protesting like this. When we saw mass protests in Hong Kong, for example, that before the crackdowns on democracy in Hong Kong, and this was in itself a revolution, even if unsuccessful, because China managed to crack down. Like, and we're seeing now mass protests in China when we know from Hong Kong the risk that people incur, the years and years and decades behind bars they will face. Despite this, that like this is no longer tenable. It is a revolution in itself. It's a cry from the heart, from everything for change.
Yeah. So we can basically what we can hope is that it's going to go beyond these protests and exploring something bigger. I think it's something that we know from revolution, and I mean we know because actually I prepared the next case that is Iran, and something that they hope for also there is that real revolutions normally succeed when security forces join in, or when security forces take a neutral stand. So I think that's something that I would advise all of us to do very closely in next few days or weeks, is the behavior of the police and the army in China, to see if they actually repress very harshly Protestants, or start, for example, joining in or tolerating behaviors, because this is something that can very easily tip the balance in a revolution.
Yeah, but normally at the beginning, you always clash against security forces.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be this phase. But basically, look at history when this stopped happening, or at least partially stopped happening. It's a very, very good sign for a change in regime. So let's hope, and it's also important to highlight that Xi has just been re-elected for a third term as president of China. And so definitely there will not be a replacement of leadership anytime soon.
Yeah, unless the Communist Party's elite is like, this is no longer possible. But,
But I think a change
maybe
in
they
regime
should grow a conscience for this.
Exactly. Let's now move to the other topic that we prepare for today. There is a very important one, is Iran. I mean, you have probably saw it in the news a few weeks back, and now a bit less because of China. But Iran is also a massive dictatorship where there's been a constant uprising since a few weeks now. And it's very, very impressive to see, especially because the protests in China are led by women.
In Iran.
In Iran are led by women. Why is it the case? So just to give you a bit of context.
Sorry, the fact that protests are led by women is not impressive. It happens most of the time, just women are forgotten by history normally.
Yeah.
This is because it's in a country that severely represses women.
I was going to go there. I was giving this context. So basically, for those of you that are not aware, since 1979, Iran is a very conservative Muslim republic, a repressive regime. And since 1983, the veil, the burqa, or similar declinations, the hijab for women is compulsory. And already in 1983, when this regime was installed, there were heavy protests. And since then, there have been a lot of like defiance of this rule. But there's the rule, and this is how it works in Iran. This until the 16th of September 2022, when a teenager was not wearing a hijab in the street called Masa Armini. Sorry again for the pronunciation. And she was not a teenager, actually.
She was 22.
And the country's morality police arrested her, beat her up, and caused her death, just to be very clear.
And the morality police is the security forces that are in charge of enforcing their interpretation of Sharia law, right?
Exactly. And obviously the government denies that this happened, but it's popular news that this was clear. And this unleashed a massive protest. So first, women went out and protested their right to basically dress as they fucking want. And then many more people start joining, lots of men, especially young people. So many
had schoolgirls, right?
Schoolgirls, school guys. Basically, it seems to be a very Generation Z-led protest. And this because of the penetration also of social media in the country, and the fact that now young people can see that in other parts of the planet, people are like, partying in a pool. There was in an interview, someone said, I see people in the US partying in a pool, and here I'm forced to take many hours of religion classes. I cannot have my freedom. These cannot be tolerated anymore. So also the digital connection established across the planet have pushed have fueled this revolution. And so it's now 2 months that people are protesting. There have been a lot of deaths, more than 400 people, according to human rights activist news agency. There's a US-based organization, and probably more. These many go unreported, especially outside of big cities, and the government is repressing their protests very harshly.
And there's been like thousands of people arrested, right? And the first death sentence handed down for, taking out you veil and inciting people to go and protest for freedom and democracy. And I think what I found super inspiring is you see a lot of famous celebrities choosing to stay in Iran. So some actresses and so on, taking out their veil and saying, I joined the protest, knowing that they will be arrested, and some of them have been arrested, and knowing that this is the price to pay. So same then in China, for me, it's you see people knowing full well what is going to happen to them, being like, this is the price to pay. It must happen for people to be able to be free. And it's insane. I think, I keep on saying it, but I can't imagine this happening. And I think unless you're forced to, you reach a point where life is no longer possible a certain way, you don't reach those stages. But when people are repressed and repressed and repressed and the rights are repressed, it gets to the stage.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think there are two things that are important right now, apart from the two elements to look out for. First of all, it's the first time where the protest seems to be very united. So across, we mentioned gender, but also generation, because obviously there are a lot of young people, but not only.
I've seen a lot of like grandmothers.
Exactly. Ethnicities, classes, social classes. So it's one of those moments where people unite across different lines. There is the same that happened, for example, in 1979. So during the first revolution, one of the most recent revolution of Iran. So that's already very interesting because it didn't happen before for a long time. And the second thing is linked to what I mentioned before about security forces. So there have been already a few examples, so far just anecdotal evidence, but of riot police joining the protest, allowing the protest, so not intervening. And this is very interesting because, as I mentioned before, in 1979, the moment where the protest really tipped off was after several massacres, basically. At a certain point in, I think it was December, January 1978, 1979, the security forces declared themselves neutral. So they said, we're not going to continue this. We are standing by and waiting for a regime change. So if this happened again, it means that Iran will probably have a different regime. Because obviously when the security forces are gone and the popular will is very clear, normally dictators either flee or arrested and so on. So,
I think something is that you already see a change. Like as soon as this protest started, I remember so many Western commentators going like, this is not going to last 2 days. Impossible. They will get crushed and so on. And yes, people are dying. People are getting arrested. People are being sentenced to death. People are injured. People are dead. But it's continuing. People understand that it's that freedom and democracy are fundamental. They decided that this is the price to pay. And I don't think, I think it's anecdotal. Indeed, security forces standing by. I don't think they allow the protests. I think they massacre people and should be held accountable for it. But I think it shows that people know this is going to happen. They still decide to go on the street. They still decide that this is not the life they want. And I find it very interesting because I remember at the beginning of the protests, some images were seized by far-right commentators being like, oh, but you see, people are rebelling against the hijab. People are not rebelling against the hijab. People are rebelling against being forced to wear or not to wear something and not being able to choose for yourself. And this is at a moment where in the US, abortion rights are being cracked upon, where in many countries in Europe, abortion rights are being cracked upon, where across the world, we see, for example, in Afghanistan, we see girls not having access to education anymore, not being able to go to recreational parks, not being able to partake in public life. Or across the world, we see femicides continuing, growing, and so on. So I think it's at a moment where you have such a level of violence against women in so many different ways, whether psychological, whether legal, whether physical, and so on, that's slowly but surely, and we've been seeing it, I think, since the election of Donald Trump with the Women's March, slowly but surely, there is a revolution that is taking place again. Slowly, we are saying no more. This has to change, and it's going to other sides of society because obviously, women's rights is representative of a broader way of treating minorities, of treating rights, and so on. And for me, this in itself is a revolution, showing that we will not stand down. We will continue to stand up for rights, for democracy, for freedom.
And I think that another interesting thing is that in both China and Iran, this is correlated with a very difficult economic situation. And again, for China, a difficult economic situation is very different than in other places because they're still growing and so on. But you see that in both cases, basically the decision of the dictatorship have caused massive suffering in terms of economic suffering, not only rights and democracy, but actually really touching people's life in many, many different ways. In Iran is in a very dear economic crisis since many, many years now because of the sanctions that they are an indirect effect of or direct effect of the decision of a regime of creating a nuclear program and be very aggressive with their neighbors and so on. And this basically touching people's lives. So you cannot have a repressive regime in terms of human rights and a failing economic policy. These together really bring even the toughest dictatorship to the brink of collapse. So again, for Iran, I think we must not only cross our fingers, we can actually help a lot spreading the word, pushing our governments to support them. Same with China, same with Hong Kong, many other revolutions that are ongoing. And I think that history showed that, tomorrow we're going to talk a lot about that. History showed that revolutions happen inside a country. People outside though can help. People outside can push, people outside can give support, people outside can give asylum. Maybe a revolution also don't happen in just a few months. There might be different stages where people have to flee and then come back. So my call to action or conclusion for this part that I prepared is that I think that sharing on social media is very important. There are many other ways to help. There are networks of Iranian abroad that are connected with the struggle. We can pressure
going to protests.
Going to protest in many cities. We can pressure our representatives to do more, to impose harsher sanctions on Iran or China. Actually, start imposing sanctions on China. There's something that we don't do. It is incredible. And say we represent probably most of the planet. I'm not aware of any country that's very harsh sanction on China. So we can do something. We can play a role and hopefully witness. If a dictatorship like China will topple at a certain point, this will be an amazing news for all those struggling for freedom across the planet. Maybe Russia will be next.
And I just want to say, I remember, so we hosted tens of protests across the world in support of Hong Kong and other freedom struggles. And I'll always remember people telling us, like on the comments when we're playing songs that were traditionally used in Hong Kong protests and so on, saying like, this means the world, we can't do it without going to prison for life. And now, you can do it and we can watch. And I think it's the least we can do across the world is stand in solidarity and unite. Borders should not be dividing us. Languages should not be dividing us. We should understand that we share this humanity and that we need to get out of it together. So again, we look today at two revolutions that are happening as we speak, China and Iran, and with the idea of examining revolutions and how they start so that we can actually then understand how to start a peaceful revolution for global democratic governance.
Exactly. And maybe in some countries not peaceful because, again, if you cannot have the civic space to actually express your ideas, they will not be necessarily peaceful.
Yeah,
but
that's always the aim, right?
Exactly. Nice. So we have covered all the topics we want to cover for today. Thank you for those that followed us. Tomorrow we're going to go throughout the history of revolutions and actually understand the elements that make a revolution happening and hopefully successfully achieving their aims. And then on Wednesday, we're going to probably cover Taiwan, as I mentioned before, the sunflower revolution. I don't know if, sorry, I didn't want to cut you.
No, we're going to be doing this. And so send us in the meantime ideas and examples of revolutions that have worked for democracy that you have seen and your recommendations. And we can't wait to see you tomorrow.
Thank you.